Sarah. I am streaming now. Let's see. It says that it's going to.
I'll let you know when I can see it on my end, but I cannot yet.
Okay, it says that it's opening YouTube.
Awesome. So I can see the preview. We're good. And then we're going to go live in 1 minute, but I'll let you know before I click the button. And then Maggie, I'm going to hang up just to where there's not, you can't hear me talking on the Zoom.
Perfect. That works.
All right, we are going to go live.
Right now?
Right now. Hitting it now.
All
Bye,
right.
Maggie.
Okay, thanks. Bye, Sarah. We are going live, Geraldine.
Welcome to the Outdoor Business Climate Partnerships 2021 kickoff event. I'm Geraldine Link from NSAA, and I just have to say, what a day to focus on Washington and climate change solutions. The Democrats have picked up 1 Senate seat in Georgia. The other race is too close to call. And the House and the Senate right now are formally counting the votes of the Electoral College. So you would think on a day like today that members of Congress wouldn't have time to talk to us. Spoiler alert, they don't, but we pre-recorded that part of the program in anticipation. So by way of background, the Outdoor Business Climate Partnership has worked over the past 2 years together to encourage action among our members in reducing their carbon footprint and advocacy on climate change solutions in the policy realm. So together, OIA, SIA, and NSAA at this time all have their own carbon reduction programs, and those are called Climate Action Corps, Climate United, and the Climate Challenge. And together, we have raised the business voice of the $887 billion outdoor recreation industry in Washington, D.C. More recently, we have refreshed our principles as an organization or as a partnership for 2021 and beyond, and we're really happy to share those with you today. So I want to start also by thanking Chris Steinkamp from SIA and Amy Horton from OIA for their collaboration in this endeavor. And I really look forward to hearing from them more at the second part of the program that we have this morning. We'll do Q&As. So without further delay, I want to introduce the moderator for our program, Brendan McGuire. Brendan is Vice President of Public Affairs with Vail Resorts, and his past Capitol Hill experience makes him the perfect person to engage with 2 members of Congress on our behalf on the important topic of how we can work together to tackle the daunting challenge of solving climate change in these tumultuous times that we find ourselves in. So Brendan, please take it away.
Thanks, Geraldine, and thank you to the Outdoor Business Climate Partnership for inviting and allowing me to participate today. As Geraldine alluded to, there is a lot in DC right now. In fact, Mr. Joe Neguse, our representative from Colorado who participated with us, is speaking in the House right now on one of the challenges to the Electoral College from the state of Arizona. So I think we made the wise decision of, instead of trying to compete with that, we connected last week over Zoom to pre-record this session. Our 2 members were Democrat Joe Neguse of Colorado and Republican John Curtis of Utah. Both are very aware of public lands issues and outdoor recreation and participated in it in their states. And we're really seeking to get their insights on how we, the Outdoor Business Climate Partnership, might work with both sides of the aisle to tackle climate change approaches and solutions in the new and current 117th Congress. It was very generous of them to make time for us during a holiday week, and we had a great discussion. And so with that, we really want to get to that and share it with you all. So let's roll the tape, please. And, it's really clear that's core for you. It's also very core to your district. So I think the question relates. Thank you, Congressman Neguse, Congressman Curtis, for taking the time this week. Know it's busy, but really appreciate you prioritizing this, really critical conversation as relates to OIA, SIA, National Skiers Association, and the Outdoor Business Climate Partnership that we formed a couple of years ago. So I have a question for each of you to start, and then we'll sort of dive into some questions for both of you to sort of answer and flow. And start with you, Congressman Neguse. You exude an urgency to address climate change. You put in some very personal sort of terms for yourself and your family. And, it's really clear that's core for you. It's also very core to your district. So I think the question relates to, how would you describe your approach to winning over and organizing colleagues for climate action in a place, Congress, where debate and conflict are inherent and often clashes with that urgency? And so sort of the follow-up to that, or the sidecar to that is, what role did the bipartisan select committee on the climate crisis play in that in your first 2 years?
Oh, well, great question. Excuse me. And thank you, Brandon. Thank you for hosting. Certainly great to be able to participate in this important event. I wish we were gathered in person, but nonetheless, nice to be able to join you all virtually. And of course, with my good friend and colleague, Representative Curtis, who I greatly enjoy serving with in the United States Congress. And we're both looking forward to the road ahead in the 117th Congress. With respect to the question that you posed, as you said, I believe climate change is an existential threat. It's certainly one of the top priorities for me in the United States Congress, arguably my top priority in terms of the work that we've done and the legislative portfolio that we have generated over the course of my first term in the Congress. And it's certainly a top priority for the people that I represent in northern Colorado and the central mountain communities that you, of course, know well, places like Vail and Breckenridge, Boulder, Fort Collins, and everywhere in between. But I think what is clear to me, and I suspect clear to John as well, is that if we're going to make any progress in moving the needle in the fight against climate change and avoiding some of the most disastrous consequences that are outlined in the IPCC report, for example, and any number of other empirical studies that have been done, it's going to take bipartisanship, that we're going to have to figure out a way to reach across the aisle and to bring folks together towards a common purpose, right, which is ultimately protecting our planet, saving our planet for future generations like my daughters. And what could be a more important mission or purpose than that? So in terms of how I approach the work in Congress, once you kind of come at this work with the premise that you're going to have to find partners to be able to get anything done that will truly move the needle, it makes it a lot easier to recalibrate, I suppose, the interactions you have with members who might have a different worldview than your own, and trying to build the kind of broad-based coalitions that you need to be able to ultimately make progress on an issue as important as climate change. I've often found, look, that you can't, you never convince anybody of anything by yelling at them and telling them that they're wrong, right? I mean, at some level, I think one part of our politics that I bemoan, and I suspect John feels the same way, is kind of the questioning of motives that is too, prevalent these days, certainly in the halls of the Congress, but also really across kind of broader society. And I try to approach my work in the Congress by not doing that, by never questioning one's motives, and instead trying to hear them out, trying to, listen to them, to empathize with their position, to see the world through their eyes and their shoes, and then, do the hard work of cajoling and convincing and persuading them to my position. It doesn't mean that that's always going to be successful. More often than not, it probably isn't. But that being said, on the rare occasions where you do find success, boy, those are real opportunities to make some significant progress. So that's the kind of work that I've tried to do in the Congress, and that my staff tries to do in their work. On the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, as you mentioned, it's an important select committee that Speaker Pelosi impaneled at the beginning of the 116th Congress, and it is a small committee, unlike the other committees that I serve on and that John serves on. It's a pretty small group, 9 Democrats, 6 Republicans. The ranking member, so the leading Republican on that committee, a man by the name of Garrett Graves, very thoughtful, courteous, and in my view, a good representative, a colleague of John Curtis's, who I think approaches these issues in a thoughtful way. Doesn't mean we always agree. Sometimes we disagree, but he's helped, I think, in trying to kind of steer the course towards one where we can actually put some bipartisan solutions on the table. And if you read through our climate report, the roadmap that we released in July, you'll find that the vast majority of the solutions that we propose are, in fact, solutions that have been endorsed by people on both sides of the aisle.
Okay, thank you. So Representative Curtis, folks in Utah are remarking how energized they are after they meet with you, after they hear from you and your staff when it comes to climate, and also how you're talking about it in the press. So it's really encouraging to see that bipartisan commitment. And I think this coalition knows that has to grow, sort of to Congressman Neguse's point. Are there any messages that you've heard from the outdoor industry that really hit the mark for you and with your caucus? And sort of the sidecar to that, are there any approaches or messages that we all should be thinking about recalibrating or adopting to help win that bigger audience?
Great questions. And before I jump in, let me just thank my fellow congressman from Colorado. And it's a delight to work with him. And I can attest firsthand his approach of bipartisan work and rolling up the sleeves is very, very much appreciated and very successful. And Congressman, I just want you to know, whenever your name's brought up on my staff, we smile and enjoy our relationship. And it's a pleasure to be with you today. To answer your question, I would say some very strong opinions on this on both sides. One is, what are you doing right? And let me just say that in Utah, look, I get it. I'm a Republican. I come from a heavily Republican district. I'm not as far along on this as all of you would like me to be. But let me just tell you, what you've done right is embrace me in what I do well and are patient with me where you would like me to do more. And I fear that too often what we do is revert to what I call a shame game, and that's find everything we don't like about what somebody's doing. And instead, the folks in Utah have found the things that they like that I'm doing, and it makes it much easier to communicate and to work with them. Now, on the flip side of this, and I would go much broader than just your industry, this is really the whole climate conversation together. Look, it's no secret that as Republicans, we don't talk about this very well. We're experts at telling everybody what we don't like, and we just kind of climb in a hole and don't have a lot of good ideas of our own. And I regret that so much of this centers around this initial, what I call litmus test, that look, if you're at a town hall meeting in Utah, I'm going to get asked, do you think the climate's changing and do you think man's influencing that? Now, that's a fairly easy question for me to answer, but it wasn't always. And for some Republicans, they struggle with that question for one reason or another. And a good comparison would be if we were to ask a room full of Democrats how they feel about the wall and the funding of the wall. Immediately the defenses come up and we don't have a good basis for discussion. And unfortunately, when we start our conversations with Republicans in demanding that they answer this litmus test, their defenses come up and we don't have productive conversations. And I would just really advocate for setting that aside and saying, look, we may or may not have disagreements. And I actually don't think we do. I just think it's hard for Republicans to talk about. But what we don't disagree on is that we want to do a better job of being stewards of this earth and this planet, and we want to take care of it. I haven't found a single Republican that doesn't want to do that. And appealing to that desire to leave the earth better than we found it, and skipping some of these divisive topics, I think would help us further this discussion and have a more productive dialogue.
Any on, you both are relatively new to Congress, especially when you compare yourselves to others who have been there a really long time. Any aha moments in those first couple of years that you've had when it comes to finding that bipartisanship, when it comes to finding that common ground?
Joe, I'll jump in if that's okay. Let me tell you what my aha moment was. I talked about this question, right? Like, is the climate changing? Is man influencing it? And I don't know why we're so resistant to it. But my aha moment is the rest of the world has figured this out. And they're ahead of us on this, and they're not afraid of this topic. And that's even, I'll tell you what, that's oil companies, that's people who normally Republicans would look to and feel like they may struggle with this question. But conservative think tanks, everybody across the board I know of has already come to terms with this question that the climate's changing and man's influence in it. And that was kind of my aha moment, is that, guess what? It's Republicans and Republican elected leaders are actually behind on this issue, not everybody else.
Yeah, my aha moment, at least with respect to bipartisanship, I think, and the ways in which I think you can pull certain levers that ultimately will bring more people along, was last year, pre-COVID, of course. We had a field hearing. The Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, as I mentioned, held a series of hearings in Washington, of course, but we also had a few hearings across the country. And one of the only official field hearing was here in Colorado, in Boulder, Colorado. And a number of my colleagues, Republican colleagues, friends of Representative Curtis, attended the field hearing, came to Colorado and gave me the opportunity to be able to show them Boulder and to show them in particular the incredible work being done by the scientists at our federal labs. In my congressional district, we're home to 13 different federal labs, NIST, NOAA, NCAR, UCAR, and National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden. So incredible resources where there's some really cutting edge work being done on the R&D side in terms of renewable energy. And after having them join us for this trip, and in particular, having the opportunity to convene and facilitate conversations between those scientists and these members, it became fairly clear to me that those conversations had a dramatic and profound impact on the way in which those members perceived the issue of climate change and the need for us to take action at the federal level. And to me, that was kind of an aha moment in the sense that perhaps this was one way to approach having these types of conversations in a way that does not raise the temperature, as John mentioned, in terms of perhaps how that has happened in other scenarios, in other contexts. And so that for me was an aha moment.
Are relationships still an important currency in Congress, or is that sort of a bygone era where folks are always home for the weekend, back in district, and it's really more partisan than relationship driven, or is it still important?
I think it's still very much important, and again, another aha moment for me in that front. Several times this year, where I've had legislation that has, for one reason or another, right, either has made it through one step of the process in the House or has gotten past the House and into the Senate, and for one reason or another, I have needed the assistance of members from the other side of the aisle. And not to embarrass my good friend here, but I called Representative Curtis not that long ago, just a week or two ago, to ask for his assistance, and he was very gracious in helping me address a public lands issue, a bill that I was trying to get over the finish line of the United States Senate. And I felt that we had developed a close enough relationship that I was comfortable with making that ask of him as well as another member. And it matters a great deal. It's not the stuff that is necessarily on the front page of the newspaper, but I think any member who is effective in the House or in the Senate would tell you that the relationships they have built across the aisle is a big part of it.
I absolutely agree. Let me tell you just quickly one of my favorite stories. I was working on a public lands bill, and I don't know too many areas where Republicans and Democrats disagree more than on public lands. And I had 1 million acres in one of my counties that we were trying to resolve. And Representative Lowenthal, a colleague of Congressman Neguse, sat on natural resources with me, and we knew he didn't like my bill. And so we trotted down to his office. We laid out all the maps on a little coffee table. And I looked him in the eye and I said, Congressman, I want to get you to the point where you don't hate my bill. And he smiled and chuckled, and he clicked off, all the things it would take for him not to hate my bill. And we went to work on those and actually got to the point where he voted for my bill. And pre-COVID, every time he'd see me in the hallway, he'd give me a hug. And I'm here to tell you that if you want to get things done, those types of relationships not only are productive, but I actually think that's what Joe and I are going to remember, 10, 20, 30 years after our time in Congress. I may not be alive 30 years after my time in Congress, but those are the things I think that we'll look back with fondness, the relationships that we built. And I also think that's where you'll see the most progress made is through those types of relationships.
Representative Curtis, is it different? Does it feel different than your time in government in Utah and Provo? Or does it feel like those lessons that you learned there translate over pretty well?
There are a few lessons. For instance, how to do a town hall meeting. I'll tell you, there's nothing like being a mayor and standing up in front of a crowd and telling them you're going to put a road in their backyard. You think what we do is hard here, trying to doing that. But it's also very, very different. As the mayor of my town, especially a town like Provo, every resident woke up and wanted me to be successful. And I felt their support. In Congress, you get the feeling that you wake up and about half the people are hoping you'll fail and laying little landmines right out there for you. And, the whole, it's really unfortunate that the cost of nature, we didn't have that back in Provo. I could do social media posts and not have trolls and things like that. And I really miss that aspect of being a mayor of a town like Provo.
So taking these sort of lessons and perspectives on bipartisanship, you all both recently launched and are prepared to lead the Bipartisan Wildfire Caucus. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that developed and some of the principles you're bringing to it and how it does or does not relate to the issue of climate?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. First and foremost, I'm grateful to John, to Representative Curtis, for his willingness to co-chair this caucus, and I'm very much looking forward to the work that I know we're going to do in the 117th Congress. The mission, the purpose of the caucus is fairly straightforward. I mean, in states like Utah and Colorado and the broader Rocky Mountain West, we know that wildfires are becoming all too common, and the ferocity, the velocity, the ferociousness of these fires has really taken off in a way that, in my view, and I think in the view of many, is exacerbated by drought conditions that are caused by climate change. And so it's clear that the Congress is going to have to take a much closer look at the ways in which we deal with megafires and wildfires across the western United States, and thinking and perhaps recalibrating the investment strategies we make at the federal level in terms of prevention and mitigation work, adaptation, and the rest. As my staff and I were visiting, so here in Colorado, many of you who are participating today in today's event will know that we had a terrible, brutal wildfire season in Colorado. Two of the three largest wildfires in Colorado's entire recorded history happened in the last 100 days. Both of those fires happened to be in my congressional district, the Cameron Peak Fire up in northern Larimer County, and the East Troublesome Fire in Grand County, which I'm sure many of you read. Those of you who don't live in Colorado maybe have read the newspaper articles at the time. The fire was just a ferocious fire that ultimately grew by 100,000 acres in one day because of the prevailing winds. And it just is a series of terrible fires that have wreaked a lot of devastation in my communities. And so as we focus now on rebuilding and recovering and working with FEMA to do the same, it occurred to my staff and myself that there ought to be a vehicle by which we can have some pretty candid conversations about what comes next with Republican and Democratic members of Congress, understanding that we live in a time of divided government, and that generally is the case, regardless of who may be, who may have the gavel today in the House or in the Senate. The pendulum always swings, and these wildfires are not going away. So we thought that maybe the right approach would be to create a bipartisan wildfire caucus that could kind of focus and zero in on these issues, and also turn down the temperature, so to speak, kind of harking back to what Representative Curtis mentioned at the top of today's program. Both climate change and the issues around forest management have been, in my view, and I think in the view of many, very politicized, and both are important parts of the conversation. You could certainly, the Forest Service officials in my district can attest to that, and the local officials here on the ground, where we have some work to do in the coming years on that front. So we thought this would be a great vehicle, a great avenue. And as we talked about who would be the best partner for this, my staff immediately came to the same conclusion I did, which was that there'd be no better partner than Representative Curtis. My staff is a big fan of his. And so he was gracious in joining and being willing to partner with us on that front. And his staff has been remarkable in that in that vein. And, looking forward to the work ahead. Right now, the real work starts in the coming weeks.
Representative Curtis, from your perspective in Utah, the wildfire issue, no less important in Utah than it is in Colorado, as far, in my experience.
Right. It shouldn't be lost on anybody that our districts are very similar and have had very similar problems with wildfires. So when we were approached with this idea, it was an easy yes for us. And I think one of the things that's important here is sometimes we want to look at the climate of this earth and tackle it all at once with one bill or one thing that we do. And what I like about this is we say, look, here's a piece of our climate problem. And we're going to come together in a bipartisan fashion and put forward ideas that, if successful, will make a difference on the overall climate of the earth. But it's not so overwhelming, right, that it just seems like we can't get anything done. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here in how we manage our forests, how we mitigate these, and really looking forward to working with Joe on this. It's a great idea. This is the type of thing back in the district where I'll say, yeah, it was my idea. But in truth, it was Joe's idea and his staff's idea. And, just a great idea. And really looking forward to what I would call digging dirt, like getting something done. Instead of just standing by and talking about, these huge problems. I think these wildfires clearly have a place for us to get things done on a bipartisan basis, where we can just mutually agree on low-hanging fruit that needs to be done.
I thought the bipartisan nature of it, it's very pointed. It's not the Congressional Caucus, it's the bipartisan caucus. And the requirement, at least according to the announcement, that in order to join, you need to bring a partner. You need to bring someone to dance with, in a nod towards the importance of keeping that balance. Where did that idea come from of bringing the partner? I think I know, but I want to ask the question.
Fairly simple. What is the old adage of emulation, right, is a form of flattery, right? Ultimately, we took the idea we emulated it based off of the Congressional Climate Caucus. So there was a caucus, there still is a caucus, I believe. I don't know if Representative Curtis is a member or not, that is bipartisan in nature and really focused on climate solutions that can bring both sides of the aisle on board. And they have a similar rule that you have to have a partner, so to speak, from a different political party join with you in order to keep the integrity of that spirit of bipartisanship alive in the caucus. And I thought that was just a very simple and yet effective way at ensuring that this caucus resists the temptation of becoming a partisan tool and instead stays true to its purpose, which is to craft bipartisan solutions around resiliency and mitigation and all the other issues that John mentioned to try to address these wildfires that affect communities of all types and sizes, and irrespective of political affiliation, right? My district's political makeup very different than John's, but we both, our constituents face very similar issues with respect to these wildfires and land management decisions.
Well, I know it's a critical issue out west, very important to the ski areas and our partners at the Forest Service, as well as the BLM to a lesser extent. We see it. We see the smoke, we smell the smoke, we see it in our communities, and too often those things get a little too close for comfort to where we operate in our communities. And so thank you for forming the caucus and doing that important work. We stand by to be helpful on that. Representative Curtis, I'm going to direct this one to you. So in the recently passed and signed, fresh news, stimulus and year-end appropriations bill, there were a lot of energy and climate related provisions, a 15-year phase down on hydrofluorocarbons, an extension of solar and wind tax credits, and funding for R&D on a number of clean energy technologies. Thank you, both of you, for being a part of that bipartisan work. Is there something to take away from that, from the success of those provisions in that sort of package, that that we should be paying more attention to? Aha moments in that success, candidly.
Yeah, I would point to a couple of things. Sometimes, and I've referred to this before, we want this grand slam, this one solution that's going to fix everything. And I'm not saying we shouldn't aspire for that, but while we're aspiring for that, trying to make that happen, boots on the ground, good ideas. There are a lot of good ideas out there that do get bipartisan support. Let me just throw out a couple that we're trying to advocate for. And the first is grid level storage. That's the bottleneck right now in renewables. And if we can do a better job with grid level storage, and incentivize that industry, I think we can make remarkable progress. And the second is we've got this great clean technology here in the United States. We've got to figure out how to export it and get it overseas, where we all know the vast amount of the carbon is coming from non-U.S. sources. And we can be wildly successful here in the U.S., but ultimately, unless we're successful overseas, we can't tackle this problem.
Representative Neguse, takeaways for you on the package and opportunities coming out of it?
Yeah, two things. One, I think John's articulation of those two priorities, just by way of example, are priorities that could generate, in my view, bipartisan support in the Congress. I mean, both of those concepts that he mentioned, I think, are issues, they're proposals that have certainly been priorities for the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, and I think on my side of the aisle are areas that we'd like to see movement on. And I think he is right that at the end of the day, there is no panacea. I mean, there's no silver bullet. It's going to take, as one can see, gleaning the 500-page roadmap that we released earlier this year. There's no singular policy prescription. It's a combination of different policies that I think we're going to need to pursue across a series of different industries, right? Not just in terms of electric production and on the grid, but agriculture, transportation, and so on. And so I think one takeaway from the omnibus bill that you mentioned and the very significant wins, in my view, that we secured for clean energy, when you think about the PTC, the ITC, the fact that, probably the most far-reaching action on refrigerants, as you mentioned, that the Congress has done in its history, right? Those are all fairly important, in my view, and I think the view of many others, important steps forward. And so the takeaway from me would be that bipartisan compromises can still happen in Washington. It just takes hard work. And I think perhaps we can look to that. Again, we'll see what the makeup is of the United States Senate and in the coming weeks, I guess, after the runoff elections. But I suspect that irrespective of those results, we're going to need, to the extent that we want to get climate legislation through the House, through the Senate, into President-elect Biden's desk, it's going to take building a broad-based coalition, which means striking some compromises. And I think that the bill that was passed and ultimately signed into law just yesterday is perhaps a reflection of that.
So looking toward 2021, what can we do? What can the outdoor industry do to help create that common ground, to encourage people onto that common ground, and with specific areas or issues related to energy and climate?
I'm just smiling here because while we're talking about energy, my motion detectors didn't detect any motion, so my lights went out. And I either have to get up and leave you and walk across the room to get it going, or sit here with this very, very pale face. So I think I'll just sit here. Let me just tell you, there is so much to do. And I think, what I would encourage people to do is to reward those good behaviors that you like, and be very careful with what here again I'll refer to as the culture of shaming. There's so much that you could find wrong with all of us, right? And things that we could do better, but focusing on the positive and what we're doing and the success that we're having. a lot of times we talk about climate and we almost don't want to acknowledge the success we've had because there's so much work ahead of us to do. But it's kind of human nature to say, no, we can't really acknowledge those successes. And I think that's a huge mistake. I think every once in a while we need to pause and celebrate that we have made some progress here. And when we celebrate that, I think we're more likely to get more of that type of behavior. And so I'm hoping that we can have a positive attitude. We can look and see what's going well, and that will inspire others to do even more.
You know, I would just add that democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires the active engagement of everyone in order for us to have as robust a republic as we'd like. And so I would certainly encourage you all to continue sending us your ideas, your suggestions, your proposals. You know, the outdoor recreation industry obviously has a tremendous impact, economic impact, both in the state of Utah and in the state of Colorado. And, you know, many of you know these issues just as well as John and I. And so when we're talking about, for example, we have a bill to create a 21st century civil conservation corps that's largely premised in working in the outdoor industries, right? A new generation of outfitters and guides and restoration work on our trails and so forth. So much of that, again, you all know a great deal about. And so I would encourage you to lift your voices, as you no doubt do, but to continue doing that in the coming year so that we can leverage your expertise as John and I continue to try to do our important work in Washington.
Well, that's excellent. You know, I know the Outdoor Business Climate Partnership stands ready to testify, to provide testimony, to provide facts. It's a big industry, and we want to use it to advance these important issues, really critical to us, our industry, our employees, and our guests. So I want to thank you both for your time, and thank you for your work and your dedication to serving your folks in Congress.
Thank you. Thanks, Congressman.
So, you know, my takeaway from that was really just an excitement to hear Representative Neguse and Representative Curtis, two members who are from different parties, different states, authentically talk about how much they respect each other and their willingness to roll up their sleeves to find common ground on issues of mutual interest, including climate change. It's an inspiration for our collective work on this critical issue, in my opinion. The next part of our program is with the day-to-day principles of the Outdoor Business Climate Partnership. We're going to hear from each one of them to get their reactions to the representatives and their aspirations for 2021 and beyond. First up with from OIA is Amy Horton. Hi, Amy, how are you?
Hey, great to be here.
Well, welcome. Can you tell us what the future holds for the Climate Partnership's work?
Yeah, man, certainly a lot has changed in the past year, especially the past few months. Obviously, we have a new president, president-elect, and we support President-elect Biden's Build Back Better agenda. In a moment, we'll pull up some of our principles that Geraldine mentioned at the start of the program, but we support using all of the tools that you're about to see on this slide to help position our country for a successful net zero future, which is where, you know, science says we need to be by 2050. And, you know, simultaneous to that, support a healthy outdoor recreation experience for everybody. So these principles actually may look familiar. They're not, we didn't invent them. They're inspired by a number of groups that are also working to advance responsible climate policy. But, you know, we put an outdoor business spin on them because they're very relevant to outdoor business and to the outdoor industry, winter sports, and other parts of the outdoor industry. So I'll just maybe tick through them here briefly before I hand it back to you, Brendan. So standards and legislation to curb carbon emissions across the largest emitting sectors. So obviously, maybe it's not so obvious, but the outdoor industry, winter sports industry are not the largest carbon emitters. But we rely on those larger sectors like transportation and the electricity, some of those larger emitting sectors to run our businesses, and obviously to get people outdoors. So we support standards and legislation, for example, to electrify the transportation sector, to build charging infrastructure, also, the electricity sector to convert the grid and our energy system to renewable energy. On investments, that was mentioned a lot in the conversation between Curtis and Neguse. So investments to accelerate the transition to a zero emissions economy, including research, jobs and green infrastructure. And I would, on the green infrastructure front, include things here like more parks, paths that sequester carbon and can reduce reliance on fossil fuel transportation, and also help get people outside. Incentives were also mentioned a number of times for things like renewable energy and storage, clean transportation, clean tech innovation, natural climate solutions. We would also include here business incentives for those companies that are taking bold climate action to reduce their own footprints. And then, of course, through all of it, the justice and equity lens to rectify the disproportionate impacts on Black, Indigenous, and communities of color in the transition to a clean energy economy. So these principles, like I said, are maybe familiar to some. They were inspired by a number of other groups working on climate policy. They'll form the basis of our advocacy work at OBCP with Congress, with federal agencies, with the administration. They also accelerate and reinforce the really important work our collective members at NSAA, SAIA, and OIA are taking to reduce their own carbon footprints. So I'd say one other priority for our group and our collective organizations, in addition to advocacy, will be to continue helping our members reduce their own emissions, whether that's through the Climate Challenge or Climate United or the Climate Action Corps. We definitely view rejoining Paris, which Biden has pledged to do early on, as the beginning and not the end, and believe we'll all have to do our part to meet these larger national targets that will be coming, even though we are by and large small and mid-sized businesses. So that work of, it sort of creates a virtuous cycle, that work of reducing our own value chain emissions associated with all the gear we make or the operations we're running in ski areas and things like that. That work will help our members sort of build muscle for more advocacy, get them ready to testify and participate. So OBCP will be doing outreach with all those relevant committees, some of which were mentioned in that conversation: the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, Natural Resources, Energy and Commerce. There's also the Outdoor Recreation Caucus was mentioned, Ski Caucus, and the newly formed Wildfire Caucus. So, and then all the corollaries in the Senate as well. So we want to provide testimony, act as a resource, and really bring the outdoor business voice to those groups. Last thing I'd say is we will actively work to bring together bipartisan work in chunks, in pieces that will collectively make a big difference. We hope to foster more of that with the various businesses that are involved in our member organizations. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
And thank you, Amy, and thank you for what OIA does, what all your members do. Just such great leadership there. Chris Steinkamp, SIA. Can you share a little bit about your thoughts and how you think about how the partnership can actively foster that bipartisanship that we heard so much about from the representatives?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brendan. As both congressmen mentioned on the video that you just saw, a bipartisan approach is critical to the success of climate progress. And we, as the OBCP and the outdoor industry, are particularly positioned to lead this approach. Even after last night, with this majority in Congress that we have now, we can't forget that bipartisanship is really, really important to make long-lasting progress. So no matter what your political affiliation is, we all recognize the importance of clean air, clean water, consistent winters, and the role that a healthy outdoor ecosystem plays in our lives. So, not only is this a core value of the winter outdoor industry, where our passion runs really deep, but this idea is bipartisan in its core. So, and it's often overlooked, in this us versus them political environment that we unfortunately have right now. Because deep down, we all share the same core values, and the outdoors is truly bipartisan. So, that's one aspect of it. But from a business perspective, this is natural for us. There's an outdoor rec and snow sports industry in virtually every state, and 37 states have ski areas in both red and blue states. So we are constituents on both sides of the aisle. And in Utah, for example, where both energy and outdoor recreation are huge job drivers, our political representatives may not share our approach to climate change necessarily, but I really do think that they share our environmental values. And leveraging that opening for productive conversation is really how we need to approach this. But thirdly, our elected officials really can't ignore us. The U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis data shows that the entire outdoor industry, which the OBCP represents, accounts for $788 billion in consumer spending. And that is a really powerful voice that outshouts many, many big lobbyists. So we can't forget that we have an economic stake in this and an economic, power that few groups can wield. So combine that with our passion and our ability to really drive change, because we are the ones that are living this outdoor industry. It's a really powerful kind of combination of assets. But there are more representative Curtises and Neguses out there. But instead of waiting for them to come to us, I think it's our role to give them an opportunity to step out. And so a big part of what we're going to do in our advocacy strategy going forward is having conversations with elected officials in our districts that share our values and find common ground with them. And that's really important because I think that's the bridge that we're going to have with a lot of elected officials that may not agree with our approach to climate, but we can find this common ground because of who we are. But our approach has to be thoughtful, and I think you saw that with what Representative Curtis said. We can't shame our elected officials into agreeing with us or into changing their perspective. That's not going to get us anywhere. And we may not get everything we want at first, but as both Representative Curtis and Neguse said, relationships are still very important, and they're part of deal making in Washington, and even for us. So it's up to us to foster those relationships with some unlikely partners to ultimately land where we need to be. So in short, I think, we have to be allies and not adversaries. And again, it may not happen quickly, and progress on climate may come in very much smaller wins, but those really add up and they create momentum towards where we ultimately need to be. And because of our unique position in an industry that's intrinsically passionate about and dependent on a healthy outdoor ecosystem for our future, we're the ones that should be out front in leading this change and spearheading this bipartisan approach. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Turning now to Geraldine with NSAA. Geraldine, your thoughts on the role and the ability of outdoor brands, retailers, and ski resorts to support the partnership and its mission on climate solutions.
Sure thing. So Brendan, I would mention three things that our members can do. The first, like Congressman Neguse emphasized, is to get engaged. He mentioned that democracy is not a spectator sport. And so our members can do things like signing on to larger movements, like We Are Still In, now called We Are All In, which is a commitment to reducing your carbon footprint. And OBCP signed on to that movement. We were thrilled to see so many of our members sign on as well individually. So I think taking those steps that are easy like that right away are really helpful. The second thing would be ready to provide testimony in Washington. This is something that the Outdoor Business Climate Partnership can help set up opportunities for. So we can line up the opportunities, but ultimately committees and members of Congress, they really want to hear from their constituents or businesses in the trenches. And that is all of you. So I just wanted to mention that because when testimony is needed, the opportunity comes up really quickly and you have to act quickly. And so I would just say to all of our members, please be ready if we do call on you to help out there. Better yet, if you want to volunteer, go ahead and reach out to us and let us know. And I would also note there that if the Democrats take the Senate, which looks like things are leaning that way, we're going to have even more opportunities for testimony, all of the different forums that Amy mentioned, caucuses and committees. So that's going to be, I think, a great thing about 2021 and beyond for this partnership. And then finally, I just wanted to mention for our members to take the advice of Representative Curtis to heart and reward good behavior. I think that was an excellent point that he made. And you can do that by thanking your representatives for what's already happened in the stimulus bill in terms of advancing climate solutions. You can even thank them just for making positive, proactive statements about addressing climate change. We've seen those dramatically increase in the last year. And those little things, I think, are the key to striking up a really positive relationship and not shaming, but encouraging more of the same for the future. So I would just say, let's all start this new year with a new mindset. And that is focusing not on differences, but on those common values that we have, that Chris mentioned, that both of the representatives mentioned also in the video, and take those common values, build on them, and go from there.
Thanks, Geraldine. I just want to offer Chris and Amy a final chance. Any thoughts on the Georgia Senate race outcomes and projected outcomes that Geraldine mentioned, and what you might be hearing from your networks on how that affects our work?
Just super briefly, and it's hard to concentrate, I'm sure, for everyone amid all the chaos happening today, but we still need 60 votes in the Senate to get meaningful legislation passed. So our course of action, everything that was talked about today, doesn't really change. We still need to focus on the moderates and look forward to working together in 2021.
Chris?
Yeah, and I would agree with Amy, and I would just say, don't take it for granted. We have a unique ability now potentially to really drive some change, but this change, could be here for a while. It could not be. So we've got to really focus on what we want to accomplish over the next few years and get after it, but do it in a respectful, bipartisan way, because we really do need long-lasting change, and forcing our agenda through in this short period for small wins and doing that with a short-sighted approach might not be the best way, but we're really excited about it. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. So Amy, Chris, Geraldine, thank you. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, for taking the time to hear from our representatives. Special thanks to Representatives Neguse and Curtis. We wish them and their staffs good luck and good health, and hope they're staying safe in Washington, D.C. today. And we look forward to working with them constructively in the 117th Congress. If you or your organization are ready to take action, take more action, or want to learn more, please contact your association's representative to the OBCP and let them know. They're here for you. They want to hear from you, and they can help point you in the right direction as it relates to the different climate programs that each association and organization has going on. We're showing a slide here of the primary contacts who you met here today. And with that, we're happy to turn everyone back with 5 extra minutes and wish everyone a happy new year and a healthy, happy week. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Brendan.
Thanks,
That was
Brendan.
awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you,
guys.
Brendan.